snow blanketed the forest in eerie silence. The morning light filtered weakly through the branches, casting pale streaks across the frozen ground. A group of hunters moved cautiously through the trees, rifles slung over their shoulders, their boots crunching softly in the frost. They weren't after deer or elk this time. They were tracking a wolf pack that had been sighted too close to town. But what they stumbled upon that morning wasn't what any of them expected. Near the edge of a clearing, beneath a fallen pine, they spotted movement, a faint rise and fall beneath a layer of snow. When they drew closer, their hands froze on their weapons. There, curled up together, were two shapes. One was a massive grey wolf, its fur dusted with white, and its body curled protectively around something small. The other was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 10. His clothes were torn, his skin pale and frostbitten, but he was breathing, alive. His small hand rested on the wolf's flank, and the great animal's chest rose and fell slowly beneath him. The wolf's head was turned outward, its yellow eyes half open, as if guarding even in sleep. For a moment no one dared move. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "Is he protecting him?" one of the hunters whispered. The oldest of the men, a weathered ranger named Elias Moore, lowered his rifle. "No," he said softly. "He's keeping him warm." The others looked at him in disbelief. A wolf protecting a human child? Impossible. Yet there it was, raw, undeniable, and real. Elias took a slow step forward. The snow crunched, and the wolf's ears twitched. A low growl rumbled from its throat. Elias froze, his pulse hammering. "It's all right," he murmured. "We're not here to hurt him." The wolf's gaze met his, sharp, intelligent, filled with something more than instinct. And in that moment, Elias swore he saw understanding. Then, as if deciding the boy was safe, the animal rested its head back down. "Get the blanket," Elias ordered quietly. "We're taking them both. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more real, emotional stories that prove the wild still has the power to move the human heart." The hunters worked in silence, their breath rising like ghosts in the cold air. The boy's eyelashes were rimmed with frost, his face pale as marble. Elias knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers gently to the boy's neck. A pulse, faint but steady. Relief flickered across his weathered face. "He's alive," he whispered. Barely, but the wolf wasn't moving. Its massive body rose and fell only once every few seconds, and its fur was matted with streaks of blood near the hind leg. A trap wound. Elias recognized it instantly, one of the metal snares laid by poachers deep in these woods. The wolf had escaped, but at a terrible cost. "Sir," one of the younger hunters said, clutching his rifle nervously, "we can't bring that thing with us. It's a predator. It could wake up and—" Elias cut him off sharply. "That thing saved this boy's life. We're not leaving it to die." The others exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared argue. They'd all seen it, the way the wolf had sheltered the child, its body curved protectively like a mother's embrace. Elias removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around the boy. The child stirred weakly, a soft sound escaping his lips. Not quite a word, more like a whimper. He clung tighter to the wolf's fur, refusing to let go even in his half-conscious state. "Easy, son," Elias said gently. "You're safe now. We'll get you home." When the men tried to move the wolf, it suddenly growled, low, hoarse, defensive. The boy's eyes flickered open, wide and frightened. "No!" His voice cracked through the frozen air. "Don't hurt him, please." The hunters froze. The boy's small hands trembled as he reached out, shielding the animal with his body. Elias raised a calming hand toward the others. "No one's going to hurt him," he said softly. Then turning back to the boy, "What's his name?" The child blinked, dazed. His lips were blue. "Gray." "His name's Gray." Elias nodded slowly. "All right, son. We'll take you both." It took nearly an hour to load them onto the sled. The wolf's body was heavy, its fur caked with snow and dried blood. The boy stayed pressed against it the entire time, refusing food or warmth from anyone else. His bond with the animal was unshakable, primal, unexplainable. The hunters began their long trek back to the outpost. The forest loomed around them, the wind cutting through the trees with a mournful wail. Elias walked at the front, guiding the team, his mind racing with questions. How had a child ended up in this part of the wilderness, a place miles from any settlement? And how long had he been out here alone? As dusk fell, the group reached the ranger cabin, a small wooden refuge deep in the forest, its windows glowing faintly against the snow. They carried the boy inside first, laying him near the fire. The wolf was next. Its breathing was shallow now, labored. Elias set down his rifle and knelt beside the animal, carefully examining the wound. The trap had torn deep into its leg. Without treatment, the wolf wouldn't survive the night. "Hold the lantern closer," he ordered. One of the men obeyed reluctantly, keeping a wary distance. Elias cleaned the wound with melted snow, then bandaged it with strips torn from his own shirt. The wolf flinched but didn't bite. It simply watched him, its golden eyes dim but alert. When Elias finished, he looked over at the boy, who was now sitting up, shivering but awake. "You're lucky we found you when we did," he said softly. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, as if the question didn't belong to him anymore. "Luke," he whispered. Luke Anders. Elias recognized the surname. The Anders family had been reported missing 3 weeks ago after their car was found wrecked on the North Mountain Road. Search teams had combed the area for days, but no one thought anyone had survived. Luke. Elias swallowed hard. "You've been out here all this time?" The boy nodded weakly, his eyes filled with tears. "I tried to follow the road, but I got lost. It was so cold. And then Gray found me. He didn't hurt me, he just laid next to me." The boy's voice trembled as he reached out to touch the wolf's paw. "He kept me warm." Every night, the room fell silent. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Elias felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, a kind of reverence. He looked at the wolf again, this time not as a predator but as a guardian. "He saved you," Elias murmured. The boy nodded. "He's my family now." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. The men who had once come to hunt wolves now found themselves standing watch over one. As the night deepened, Elias sat by the fire, keeping vigil over the boy and the wounded wolf. The child slept peacefully, his small hand still resting on Gray's side. The wolf, though weak, kept its eyes half open, watching the door, the boy, everything. Elias leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. In all his years patrolling these woods, he had never seen anything like it. A bond born not of fear or need, but something purer. As dawn crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, a question lingered in his mind, refusing to fade. If a wild creature could show such loyalty, what did that say about humanity, the species that hunted it? And as the first light touched the wolf's fur, Elias swore he saw it. A faint flicker of strength, a sign of life returning. But deep down, he knew this fragile piece wouldn't last. Something, or someone, would come looking for that wolf. And next time, mercy might not arrive in time, to be continued. By the next morning, word of the miraculous rescue had spread through the nearby town like wildfire. Hunters who'd come to kill a predator were now being hailed as heroes for saving a child. But what captivated everyone wasn't just that the boy had survived, it was how he'd survived. The story sounded impossible. A young orphan, alone in a deadly snowstorm, kept alive by a wild wolf. Reporters began to gather at the ranger station before the sun had fully risen. Elias stood by the frosted window, watching the flickering red lights of their cameras through the trees. "Sir," one of the younger rangers said, "we can't keep this quiet anymore. The state wildlife department's already on their way." Elias nodded grimly. "I know." Behind him, Luke was sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a thick blanket. He looked stronger now, but his eyes remained distant, lost in memories no child should have to carry. Beside him, Gray lay on a folded quilt. The wolf's breathing was steadier, but the wound in his leg was far from healed. Luke reached out to stroke the wolf's ear, whispering softly, "It's okay, boy." "I won't let them take you." Elias turned, his chest tightening. The boy's voice carried both innocence and defiance. He had lost everything, his family, his home, but in this creature he had found something worth fighting for. A knock on the door interrupted them. Elias opened it to find two officials standing outside, a woman in a dark parka with the state emblem stitched on her sleeve, and a man holding a clipboard. Their expressions were clinical, businesslike. "Ranger Moore," the woman said. "I'm Agent Bennett with Wildlife Control. We're here for the animal." Elias straightened. "The wolf has a name," he replied. "Gray, and he's not going anywhere until he's healed." Bennett gave a tight smile. "We appreciate your compassion, sir, but that's not your call. It's a wild predator that's been exposed to humans. It poses a risk." Before Elias could respond, Luke's small voice broke through the tension. "He's not dangerous!" Both agents turned toward the boy. Luke was standing now, fists clenched at his sides. "He saved me. He didn't hurt me. He didn't even growl when I was scared. Please don't take him." Bennett softened slightly, crouching down to the child's level. "I know you believe that, sweetheart, but wild animals can't live with people. It's not safe for either of you." Luke's eyes filled with tears. "Then let me go with him." The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Elias stepped forward. "The boy's been through enough. Let him rest before you make any decisions." The agents exchanged a look, then reluctantly nodded. "We'll give you until morning. After that, the wolf comes with us." As the door shut behind them, Luke sank to the floor beside Gray, burying his face in the wolf's fur. The animal shifted, pressing its muzzle against the boy's arm as if to comfort him. Elias watched in silence, his jaw tight. Later that night, when the cabin had gone quiet, Elias poured himself a cup of coffee and sat near the fire. The boy was asleep again, his small body curled up next to Gray's. The sight stirred something deep within him. Memories of his own son, lost years ago in a car accident not far from these woods. He remembered the silence that had followed, the unbearable weight of grief that had nearly broken him. Maybe that's why this boy's fight for the wolf cut so deep. It wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about saving hope itself. Outside, a blizzard was rising again. Snow pounded against the windows, and the wind howled like the ghosts of the forest. Elias stepped outside, tightening his coat, scanning the horizon. He spotted two sets of headlights parked near the tree line, the wildlife officers, waiting out the night in their truck. They wouldn't leave. They were determined to take the wolf. Elias walked back inside, his boots leaving trails of snow across the wooden floor. He looked at Luke and Gray, two souls from different worlds, bound together by something deeper than anyone could explain. "Elias?" The boy's voice was soft, sleepy. He rubbed his eyes. "Are they coming back?" "Yes," Elias said quietly. "Tomorrow." Luke hesitated, then whispered, "Can't we run away?" Elias knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "If we did that, they'd find us, and then Gray might really be hurt. We have to be smart, son." The boy looked down at the wolf. "He's not just an animal. He's all I have." Elias swallowed hard. "I know." As the night wore on, Elias couldn't shake the image of the agent's cold expressions. He knew what would happen if they took the wolf. Gray would be sedated, transported and studied, if not euthanized. A wild animal that had bonded with a human was seen as unpredictable, dangerous, a liability. But to Luke, Gray wasn't dangerous. He was salvation. At dawn, Elias made his decision. He woke the boy gently and handed him a small bag. "Pack your things, Luke. We're leaving." The child blinked in confusion. "Leaving where?" Elias glanced toward the forest beyond the window, where the morning light glimmered faintly through the trees. Somewhere safe. He didn't know exactly where, only that it would be far from the reach of those who didn't understand what this bond meant. Gray seemed to sense it too. The wolf rose slowly, limping on his injured leg, and pressed his nose against Elias's hand. The touch felt almost like gratitude. They slipped out the back door before sunrise, their breaths clouding in the cold air. The snow was deep, but Elias knew these woods like the lines on his palms. He guided them north, toward an abandoned ranger cabin miles away. Behind them, the sound of an engine roared to life. The agents had discovered the empty station. "Move," Elias whispered. Stay quiet! Luke clung to Gray's fur as they climbed through the frozen brush. The wolf's body brushed against his side for balance, his warmth steady and grounding. They were 3 fugitives now, an old man, a broken child, and a wounded guardian. And as the distant voices of the agents echoed through the trees, Elias realized something with chilling certainty. They weren't just running from the law. They were running from a world that no longer believed in mercy. The morning light struggled to pierce the thick veil of grey clouds as Elias led Luke and Gray deeper into the wilderness. Snow clung to the boys' boots, his breath coming out in ragged clouds as they climbed a steep ridge. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, its silence broken only by the distant cry of ravens circling above. Behind them, faint but growing louder, came the sound of engines. "They're coming," Elias muttered. Tightening his grip on his rifle, Luke looked back nervously. "Will they hurt Gray?" Elias hesitated before answering. "If they catch us, they'll take him away, and they won't ask what he means to you." That was enough for the boy. He pressed forward, one hand clutching Gray's fur for balance. The wolf limped beside him, his breath heavy, but there was a determination in his eyes, a wild fire that refused to die. By midday they reached a clearing overlooking a frozen river. The storm had eased, but the cold was unforgiving. Elias scanned the area, spotting an old ranger cabin half buried under snow. "We'll rest there," he said, guiding them toward it. Inside, the cabin was barely standing. The wood creaked under their weight, and a broken window let in gusts of icy air. Elias quickly built a small fire, while Luke fed Gray bits of dried meat from his pack. The wolf ate cautiously, never taking his eyes off the boy. "You've done this before," Elias said softly, watching Luke. The boy nodded. "He doesn't trust anyone else. Just me." He hesitated, then added, "I think he knows I'd die for him." Elias's chest tightened. The boy's words carried no exaggeration, no childish fantasy, just truth. That same kind of loyalty was something most men had forgotten. The sound of an approaching snowmobile shattered the quiet. Elias peered through the cracked window. 2 agents, their parkas gleaming white against the forest. They were closing in. "Luke," he whispered urgently, "we need to move, now." The boy's eyes widened in fear. "They found us?" Elias nodded grimly. "They're not far." They doused the fire and slipped out the back. Gray limped ahead, leading them down a narrow slope toward the river. The snow crunched beneath their feet, each sound echoing like a warning. The river's surface was a thin sheet of ice, glistening pale blue under the fading light. "We can cross here," Elias said, testing the ice with his boot. "Stay close." Luke followed carefully, his hand gripping Gray's neck for support. Halfway across, a sharp crack split the air. The ice groaned under their weight. "Don't move!" Elias shouted, but it was too late. The ice shattered, plunging Gray's front legs into the freezing water. The wolf yelped, thrashing as the current pulled at him. "Gray!" Luke screamed. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees, reaching out toward the animal. "Luke, no!" Elias lunged forward, grabbing the boy's coat before he could fall in. The ice bent beneath them, threatening to break completely. Gray's golden eyes met Luke's for a split second, desperate pleading. Elias didn't think, he just acted. He slammed the butt of his rifle against the ice to create a gap, then plunged his arm into the freezing water. His hand found the wolf's scruff, and with a guttural yell, he hauled the animal free. They collapsed together on the opposite bank, shivering violently. Luke threw his arms around Gray, burying his face in the wolf's soaked fur. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," he whispered through chattering teeth. Elias pulled off his coat and wrapped it around them both, his own body shaking from the cold. "We can't stop here," he said hoarsely. "They'll catch up soon." But as he tried to stand, his legs faltered. The icy water had soaked through his boots and pants. Frostbite was setting in, Luke noticed. "Elias?" "I'm fine," the ranger lied, though pain burned through his limbs. He pointed north. "There's a cave up that ridge. Go, I'll follow." The boy's eyes filled with fear. "No, not without you." Elias forced a smile. "You're stronger than you think, Luke. Get him to safety." Luke hesitated, then nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. With Grey limping beside him, he began the climb. Elias watched them go until the forest swallowed them from view. Then he turned toward the sound of the snowmobiles. Two figures were emerging from the trees, their flashlights cutting through the fog. Ranger Moore. One shouted, "Step away from the animal." Elias steadied himself, raising his rifle, not to shoot, but to stall. "You're too late," he said calmly. "They're gone." The agents spread out, scanning the area. "That wolf is government property now," one said sharply. "Hand it over or you'll be charged with obstruction." Elias laughed bitterly. "Property? You're talking about a living being that saved a child's life." The man's expression hardened. "That's not your call." Elias took a step back, his boots crunching in the snow. "Maybe not. But it's the right one." The first agent raised his gun, a tranquilizer dart loaded. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." But before he could fire, a deep, haunting howl rose from the ridge, Grey's call echoing through the frozen valley. It was long, mournful, and defiant. The agents froze, their eyes darting toward the sound. Elias seized the moment. He dropped his rifle into the snow and spread his hands. "You'll never catch them now. That wolf knows these woods better than any of us ever will." The older agent sighed in frustration. "You're risking your career for a beast, Moore." Elias looked toward the ridge, where the faint shape of the boy and the wolf disappeared into the storm. "Not for a beast," he said quietly. "For a miracle." As the snow thickened and night swallowed the forest, Elias sank to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. He could still hear the distant howl of Grey, a sound that seemed to carry not just across the mountains, but into the soul of anyone who heard it, somewhere out there. The boy and the wolf were still running, together, but the hunt was far from over. The storm howled through the forest like a wounded beast. Snow whipped across the mountainside, reducing everything to a blur of white and shadow. Luke stumbled forward, half dragging, half guiding Grey up the rocky incline. His small hands were numb, his face raw from the wind. But he refused to stop. "Just a little further, Grey," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We can make it." The wolf limped beside him, each step labored. Blood from the reopened wound on his leg left dark stains in the snow. His breath came in visible clouds, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He was suffering, but he wouldn't let go. Finally, through the curtain of snow, Luke saw it, a shallow cave hidden beneath a jagged overhang of rock. Relief surged through him. He crawled inside, dragging the wolf with him, both collapsing onto the icy stone floor. The cave was cold, but it was shelter. The wind screamed outside, but in here it was muffled, distant like a nightmare closing its eyes. Luke curled up beside Grey, his fingers digging into the wolf's thick fur for warmth. The boy's body trembled violently, exhaustion threatening to pull him under. Grey shifted, pressing his body closer to the child. His heartbeat was slow but steady, and his fur radiated faint warmth. For hours they stayed like that. Two souls lost in the wild, clinging to each other against the storm. When Luke finally woke, it was still dark. His stomach growled and his lips were cracked with thirst. The fire had burned out hours ago, if it could even be called a fire, made from frozen sticks and fading hope. He blinked groggily and looked at Grey. The wolf's head rested on his paws, eyes closed. "Grey," Luke whispered. No response. Panic surged through the boy's chest. He crawled closer, shaking the wolf gently. "Grey, wake up, please!" The wolf stirred, his body jerking weakly. His eyes opened, dull and glassy. He wasn't dead, but he was close. Luke's heart raced. He pressed his forehead against Grey's, tears freezing on his cheeks. "You can't leave me," he whispered. "You promised." Outside, thunder rolled, not the sound of a storm, but something else. Engines, voices, the boy's head shot up. Light flickered outside the cave, flashlights moving across the snow. The agents had found them. Luke's pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at Grey, then at the cave mouth. "I won't let them take you," he whispered fiercely. "Never." He scrambled to his feet, grabbing a stick and shoving it into the dying fire until its tip glowed faintly. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all he had. He crouched near the entrance, heart pounding. Two shadows appeared, silhouettes against the white. "There!" a voice shouted. Inside the cave. Luke pressed himself against the rock wall, clutching the stick so tightly his knuckles went white. As the first man stepped inside, the boy swung, striking the intruder's arm with all his strength. The man cursed, stumbling back. "Kid! Stop! Leave him alone!" Luke screamed. His voice cracked, echoing off the stone walls. The second agent raised a tranquilizer rifle, his expression grim. "Hold the kid back. We can't risk that animal attacking. Don't you dare!" Elias's voice rang out suddenly, cutting through the chaos. He appeared behind the agents, face pale from cold, but eyes burning with determination. The agents turned, startled. "Moore, what the hell?" "Lower your weapons," Elias ordered. His voice was quiet but deadly. "You fire that dart and I swear you'll regret it." The agents hesitated. Elias stepped forward, blocking their path. "You see what that wolf's done for him?" he said, pointing toward Luke. "That boy's alive because of him, because of loyalty. Something you can't measure with your rules." The taller agent shook his head. "You're risking everything for a wild animal." "The state will never allow this." "Then the state's forgotten what mercy means," Elias shot back. Behind him, Luke dropped the stick and ran to Gray, kneeling beside the wolf. "He's dying," the boy whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, help him." For a moment, even the agents froze. The wolf's breathing was shallow, his body trembling. Elias knelt beside him, pulling out a small pouch from his coat. Inside was a vial of antibiotics and a syringe, supplies from the ranger station. "Hold him still," Elias said gently. He injected the medicine into Gray's leg, then wrapped it tightly with a strip of cloth. The wolf whimpered but didn't resist. His eyes met Elias's, a look not of fear but understanding. The agents watched silently. The taller one finally lowered his weapon. "We can report this as unconfirmed," he muttered. "Say the wolf didn't survive." "No one needs to know," the other man frowned. "You'd lie for them?" The agent hesitated. "I'd rather lie than be the one who kills something pure." Elias nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As the storm eased outside, the group sat in silence. Luke stroked Gray's fur, whispering softly. The wolf's breathing steadied, his eyes flickering open again. For the first time since the ordeal began, hope returned. Elias leaned back against the cave wall, his voice barely a whisper. "He'll live. He just needs time." Luke smiled weakly through tears. "Then we stay with him." Elias gave a tired chuckle. "You've got the heart of a wolf yourself, kid." Hours passed before dawn broke over the mountain. The storm had cleared, leaving the world blanketed in gold and silver. When they stepped outside, the forest sparkled, a fragile peace after so much pain. The agents, true to their word, left quietly, their truck disappearing into the horizon. Elias, Luke, and Gray stood together at the cave's edge. Luke turned to the old ranger. "Where will we go now?" Elias looked out over the valley. "Anywhere that people can't find us." Gray nudged Luke's hand, pressing his head against the boy's chest. The gesture said what no words could. "I'm still here." Luke smiled softly. "We'll take care of each other." As they began their slow descent into the forest, the wind carried their tracks away behind them. To anyone who followed, there would be no trail, only the memory of a miracle hidden deep in the wilderness. And though the world would never know their names, the mountains would remember, the orphan and the wolf who refused to surrender to the cold. Weeks passed in the frozen wilderness, but to Luke each day felt like a lifetime. The blizzards had faded into gentler flurries, and the forest had begun to thaw under a weak winter sun. In the cave that had once been their refuge, a small fire burned each night, filling the air with the scent of pine smoke and melting snow. Gray had healed slowly. The wound on his leg had scabbed over, though he still limped when he walked. But his eyes, those golden, watchful eyes, had regained their strength. He would stand at the cave's entrance at dawn, scanning the valley below, always alert, always guarding. Luke would sit beside him, sharing bits of dried meat or the last scraps of bread Elias had managed to trade from nearby trappers. The boy spoke softly to the wolf, his words half whispers, half prayers. "You saved me, Gray. You always will." Elias watched them from a distance, wrapped in his heavy coat, his mind heavy with unspoken fears. He had lived long enough to know that miracles rarely lasted. The world always had a way of catching up. One morning, as frost clung to the edges of the cave, Elias returned from a scouting trip with a somber look on his face. Luke, who was kneeling by the fire, noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" the boy asked. Elias hesitated before answering. "Tracks," he said quietly. "Men on snowmobiles. Not hunters this time, rangers. They're sweeping the valley again." Luke's stomach twisted. "They're looking for Gray, aren't they?" The old ranger nodded grimly. "And for you, too. The newspapers back in town, they're calling you the Wolf Boy. People don't believe it's real, but the state wants answers." Luke's eyes filled with panic. "We can't let them take him. They'll lock him up or kill him." Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "I won't let that happen, but we can't stay here anymore. They'll find this cave sooner or later." For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and Gray's low breathing. Then Luke whispered, "Where will we go?" Elias looked toward the mountains rising beyond the tree line. "North," he said. "There's a valley beyond those ridges. No roads, no people. Just wilderness. It'll be hard, but it's the only chance you have." That night they packed what little they owned: 2 blankets, a handful of food, Elias's old compass, and the rifle slung over his shoulder. Luke walked beside Gray, his small hand gripping the wolf's fur as they followed the ranger into the dark forest. The journey was brutal. Snow fell again that night, thick and relentless. The trees bent under its weight, and the ground disappeared beneath it. Luke stumbled often, his legs aching, but he never complained. Each time he fell, Gray would nudge him back to his feet. "Almost there," Elias would murmur, his breath fogging the air. "Keep moving, kid. Keep moving." By dawn, the storm had cleared, but what awaited them on the other side of the ridge stopped them in their tracks. A black plume of smoke rose from the valley below. Fresh, unnatural. And there, half buried in the snow, were tire tracks leading straight toward their path. "They found us," Elias whispered. Luke's heart pounded. "What do we do?" Elias scanned the terrain quickly. "There's an old logging cabin by the frozen lake. We make a stand there if we have to." They ran. Snow sprayed around their boots as they descended the slope. Behind them, the faint hum of engines echoed through the trees. Gray ran beside Luke, his movements powerful despite the limp. He barked sharply once, a warning. "They're close." Luke cried, "Keep going!" Elias shouted. They reached the cabin just as the engines roared to life nearby. Elias slammed the door shut and barricaded it with wooden beams. The boy crouched beside Gray, holding him tightly as the sound of boots crunched in the snow outside. Then came the voices. "More! Step out with the boy and the animal!" Elias's jaw tightened. "They won't listen to reason," he muttered. Luke looked up at him, his eyes wet but fierce. "Then don't let them take him," the old ranger sighed. "You've got more courage than most men I've met, kid." He turned to Gray, kneeling down beside the wolf. "You understand, don't you?" he said softly. The wolf's gaze met his, and for a moment Elias could have sworn the creature nodded. The door shook violently as someone rammed it from the outside. Snow fell from the rafters. "Luke, listen to me," Elias said quickly. "There's a hatch under the floorboards. It leads out to the lake. Take Gray and go. Don't look back." Luke's eyes widened. "But what about you?" Elias forced a smile. "I'll keep them busy." "No," the boy cried, clutching his arm. "You can't." Elias placed a hand on the boy's cheek. "You've got something I lost a long time ago. Hope. Don't waste it." He pried the boy's fingers free and lifted the floorboards. A narrow passage led out beneath the cabin, dark and half-frozen. "Go," Elias hissed. Tears streamed down Luke's face as he guided Gray into the tunnel. The wolf looked back once, at Elias, then at the door. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, something unspoken passed between man and beast. A promise. The door burst open just as Luke disappeared into the dark. Agents flooded the cabin, shouting orders. Elias stood alone, rifle in hand. "Where are they?" One demanded. Elias gave a faint smile. "Farther than you'll ever reach." A dart struck his shoulder. He staggered, dropping the rifle, his body heavy with the tranquilizer's sting. As he collapsed to the floor, the last sound he heard was a distant howl, high, defiant, echoing across the lake. Luke and Gray emerged from the tunnel into the frozen dawn, gasping for air. The lake stretched before them, shining like glass beneath the first light of morning. The boy fell to his knees, tears freezing on his skin. He looked back toward the cabin. Smoke curled from its chimney, and tiny figures moved in the snow. "Goodbye, Elias," he whispered. Gray pressed his head against the boy's chest, as if in mourning. But then, lifting his muzzle to the sky, he howled, a long, sorrowful cry that carried across the forest. Luke buried his face in the wolf's fur. "We'll make it, Gray, I promise." The two of them stood together at the edge of the lake, two silhouettes against the rising sun. Behind them, men shouted in the distance, but the wind carried their voices away. Luke took a deep breath and stepped forward onto the ice, leading Gray across the frozen expanse. Each step was slow, careful, defiant. They were alone again, but together. That was enough. The wilderness had taken everything from them, yet somehow it had also given them everything they needed, and as the sun broke over the mountains, the boy and the wolf disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind nothing but their tracks and a legend that would haunt those woods for generations. Days passed since Luke and Gray crossed the frozen lake and vanished into the wilderness. The boy could no longer feel his feet most mornings. The cold had settled into his bones, and hunger gnawed at him constantly. Yet whenever he felt his strength slipping, he looked at Gray, that proud, scarred wolf who limped but never stopped, and found the will to keep going. The northern valley lay ahead, a land untouched by men. It stretched for miles between jagged peaks, a world of silence, broken only by the call of crows and the whisper of wind through the fir trees. Luke stumbled down a slope, clutching Gray's fur for balance. "We made it," he whispered through cracked lips. "We really made it." Gray lowered his head to sniff the air, his ears flicking at the distant sound of running water. He turned and nudged the boy forward, urging him on. They followed the faint sound until they reached a narrow stream cutting through the valley. The water shimmered beneath the pale sunlight, ice forming along its edges. Luke knelt, scooping a handful of water to his lips. It was freezing but clean, fresh, the taste of life itself. He smiled weakly, letting out a trembling laugh. "See, Gray? We'll be okay here." The wolf wagged his tail once, a small, tired motion, before collapsing beside the boy. His breathing was shallow again. Luke froze. "Gray?" The wolf's body trembled, then went still. "No, no, no," the boy whispered, dropping to his knees. "You're just tired. You'll be fine." "You have to be." But Gray didn't move. His head lay limp in the snow, his eyes closed. Luke pressed his hands against the wolf's chest, feeling desperately for a heartbeat. It was faint. There, then gone, then there again. He leaned close, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Don't you dare leave me, Gray. You promised. You said we'd always be together." The boy wrapped his arms around the wolf's neck and cried until the light began to fade. By nightfall, the temperature dropped again. The sky burned with northern lights, waves of green and blue rippling across the stars. Luke gathered fallen branches and built a fire beside Gray, his hands raw from the cold. He remembered everything Elias had taught him, how to dry wet bark, how to spark tinder with a knife. When the first flames caught, the boy whispered a shaky prayer. "Please, if anyone's listening, don't take him from me." The fire's glow reflected in the wolf's eyes. They opened, weak, slow, but alive. "Gray." The wolf stirred, letting out a low groan. His body shifted closer to the warmth. Luke laughed through his tears, collapsing beside him. "You scared me," he whispered. "You really scared me." They stayed like that all night, a boy and a wolf beneath the aurora, two survivors bound by something neither time nor fate could undo. When dawn came, Luke awoke to the sound of birds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm unlike any he'd ever known. The world looked different here, softer, brighter, untouched by the cruelty that had chased them through the mountains. He decided then they would stay. Over the next days, Luke built a small shelter from fallen logs and branches near the stream. He fashioned crude traps to catch rabbits, gathered snowmelt to drink, and used stones to sharpen sticks into tools. Gray, still recovering, watched him work with quiet devotion. Each night they'd sit together by the fire. Luke would talk about his parents, about Elias, about the world beyond the forest. "If they could see us now," he'd say, "they'd never believe it. A boy and a wolf living like this." Gray would rest his head on the boy's knee, his golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. For a while, peace returned, but peace in the wilderness never lasts long. One morning, as Luke was checking his traps, a distant sound broke the silence, a low mechanical hum. Helicopter blades. He froze, his heart stopping mid-beat. "No," he whispered. The sound grew louder, echoing through the valley. Birds scattered from the treetops. Gray stood, growling softly, his body tense. Luke ran back toward their shelter, grabbing what few supplies they had. "We have to go, Gray, now!" The wolf limped after him, struggling to keep up as they climbed toward the ridge. The helicopter appeared overhead, white with government markings on the side. Through the open door, Luke saw figures inside, rifles, binoculars. "Cameras! They found us," he said, panic breaking his voice. The helicopter hovered low, the downdraft from the blades throwing snow into the air. A loudspeaker crackled. "Luke Anders, this is the state rescue team. Stay where you are." The boy froze. Rescue team? His mind raced. They weren't here to kill the wolf. They were here for him, but as he looked at Gray, limping, scarred, trembling in the cold, he realized what rescue would mean. They would take him away. They'd take Gray away. Luke turned and bolted toward the tree line. "Come on, Gray!" Gunfire cracked in the distance, warning shots. Snow exploded near his feet. "Stop running!" A voice shouted. Luke didn't stop. He ran until his lungs burned, until the sound of blades was deafening. Then, as they reached the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley, he stopped. There was nowhere left to go. Gray stood beside him, his body shaking. The wolf turned his head, meeting Luke's eyes, calm, steady, resolute. The boy understood. "No," Luke said, tears falling. "We can find another way." "We always do." Gray took a step closer, pressing his head into the boy's chest. Then, with one last look, he turned and faced the helicopter. "Gray, no!" The wolf let out a single thunderous howl, a cry that echoed through the valley and across the mountains. Then he bolted toward the trees, drawing the helicopter's attention away. "No!" Luke screamed, but the roar of the engines drowned him out. He watched helplessly as the helicopter followed the wolf, disappearing into the forest beyond. Then came the sound, one sharp report. A gunshot. The echo lingered in the mountains long after the helicopter vanished. Luke fell to his knees, his body trembling. The snow beneath him turned dark where his tears fell. When the rescue team finally reached him, they found a boy who refused to speak, clutching a tuft of gray fur in his hand, staring at the horizon where the wolf had gone. They tried to lift him, to carry him back, but he only whispered one word, over and over into the wind, "Gray, Gray." And as the valley fell silent once more, the northern wind carried a faint echo, the ghostly sound of a wolf's howl, somewhere beyond the ridge. It would be said that for years afterward, on the coldest nights, the villagers near the mountains heard it, a boy's voice and a wolf's call, blending into one, a bond that death itself could never break.